Hello, I'm Grace and I am extremely excited to be reading one of my absolute favourites. Princesses are not quitters. Let's read it. Once, there were 3 princesses. Princess Ali, Princess Melly, and Princess Libby. They lived in a huge silver palace by the sea, with roses all around. One morning, they were sitting in the garden having breakfast, when Princess Ali threw her toast on the ground. "Oh, I am so bored," she cried. "Being a princess is the dullest ever." Just then, 3 servant girls walked by, carrying buckets of milk from the palace dairy. "Just look at them," sighed Princess Libby. "Servants have all the fun. Out in the fresh air, doing interesting things," said Princess Melly. Princess Ali jumped up, spilling her tea. "Servant girls, come here at once," she cried. The servants dropped their milk and rushed over. "Give us those things you have on," ordered Princess Ali. "Put on our dresses instead. Now you can sit in the garden all day. Ha!" The servant girls stared, but they did not argue. They put on the silk dresses. The princesses put on their rags and ran to the kitchen. "Now, Mrs. Blue," said Ali to the housekeeper, "today we princesses are going to be servants. From now until midnight, we want to be treated just like servants." "Oh, ma'am, yes, your princesses," stammered Mrs. Blue. "But do you think that's a good idea, ma'am?" "No arguing, Mrs. Blue," said Libby. So Mrs. Blue didn't argue. "Well," she said, "if you are servants, you're terribly late. Work began 4 hours ago, and you haven't done a thing." "We're ready, Mrs. Blue," cried the princesses. "Very well," said Mrs. Blue, and she gave them a list of jobs. "What fun, Mrs. Blue!" cried the princesses, and they ran off to work. They had to sweep the floors and whitewash the walls and dust the ceiling free of webs and polish the windows and scrub the pots and then go outside and sweep the path and weed the garden and scrub the fountains and feed the hens and pick the cabbages for lunch and wash the dogs and comb the cats. Very soon, Princess Melly's back was sore, Princess Ali's hands were sore, and Princess Libby's feet were sore. But they didn't want anyone to say that princesses are quitters, so they kept on working. Some of the jobs they couldn't do very well. At last, however, they finished them all and shuffled to the kitchen to find Mrs. Blue. "We're all finished, Mrs. Blue," they panted. "We're ready for lunch." "Lunch?" cried Mrs. Blue. Lunch was over an hour ago and you're late with your afternoon work." "Afternoon work?" groaned the princesses. "Well, of course," said Mrs. Blue, as she gave them another list of jobs. This sounded like a lot of work to the princesses, but they didn't want anyone to say that princesses are quitters, so they hobbled outside and began. I wish I could have some of those snacks. They had to churn the butter and drain the butter and mould the butter into pats, and every pat had to bear the crown. to show that it's a royal kind, and then they had to make the cheese and pick the fruit and sweep the halls and bring the water and knead the bread dough and peel the carrots and shear the sheep. Some of the jobs they couldn't do very well. By the time they were finished, it was dark, and they staggered inside to find Mrs. Blue. "We're finished now, Mrs. Blue," they puffed. "We'd like our dinners now." "Dinner?" said Mrs. Blue. Dinner was eaten 2 hours ago, and you haven't started your evening chores." "Evening chores?" cried the princesses. "Well, yes," said Mrs. Blue, and she gave them yet more jobs. The princesses were too tired to move, but they didn't want anyone to say that princesses are quitters. So they heaved themselves up and they dragged themselves out and they did all the jobs Mrs. Blue had listed. They had to scrub the pots and shine the dishes and throw the water out the door and wipe the cups and bake the bread and peel the fruit for the morning pie, and then they had to milk the cows and feed them hay and get the eggs and feed the chickens and walk the dogs and pet the cats and lock the windows and snuff the lights. By the time they had finished, it was midnight. Mrs. Blue had gone to bed. The princesses dragged themselves up the silver stairs and fell down snoring. The next day, the princesses slept until noon. Then they bathed in tubs of rose water and limped downstairs for breakfast. "Say, I think I made this bread," said Ally. "I peeled the fruit for this pie," said Libby. "I put the crown on this butter, see," said Melly. As they sat there eating, the 3 servant girls walked by. "How sore their backs must be," said Princess Melly. "How sore their hands must be," said Princess Ally. "How sore their feet must be," said Princess Libby. "Proclamation?" asked Princess Ally. "Proclamation!" cried Libby and Melly. So they called on their page to blow the silver trumpet, and they climbed the silver stairs to the highest balcony. When all the people had gathered, Princess Ally declared, "There will now be new rules for servants in this land. Things cannot go on as they are." The servants looked fearfully at each other. "Here are the new rules," cried Princess Libby. "You have to sleep in every day until 9, and work no more than you can do, and rest whenever you are tired, and eat when you are hungry too, and spend an hour every day just sitting in the gardens, and have holidays every year, and let's have fun. From that day to this, you will not find a happier princessdom than this one by the sea. But if you are looking for the princesses, don't try the garden. Try the dairy, the orchard, or the bakery. For princesses are not quitters. They certainly aren't. I hope you enjoyed it. Night night.